From the SABC's Auckland Park studios, welcome to this midweek edition of the Watchdog. My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and on the show tonight,
I am elated.
I am very excited. I'm ecstatic. I don't even know what to do. I'm still shaking.
So glad that I made my mom proud.
Everything went surprisingly well. I mean, I'm not surprised, but, you know, considering the circumstances.
From the reports I am getting, there's going to be
the country's school system under the spotlight once again as independent schools release their matric results the day before government schools do the same. This on the same day coastal provinces kick off the 2023 school year. With independent examination board schools today recording 98.42% nationally for the matric class of 2022, IEB CEO tells us how they did it again. And that's before our panel of academics compare and contrast the two and give us some perspective as they look at what the picture is telling us about our school system. We wrap with a look at how day one of the 2023 coastal schools year went. The Watchdog starts now. Top-achieving learners at Redham House College in Constantia have set their sights on entering leading universities to undertake demand university degrees. The top-achieving schools recorded a 100% pass rate consecutively since it was established 23 years ago. Independent examination schools, board schools have recorded 98.42% nationally for the matric class of 2022. Over 13,000 pupils have sat for their matric exams under IEB.
Learners entering the school premises for the last time to fetch statement results to mark an end of their journey at one of the prestigious schools. They formed part of the 13,536 pupils that sat for their IEB final matric exams in over 200 centers since September last year. Top-performing learners at the school say planning ahead was a catalyst for their achievements.
Exams started mid-October. Mid-late October. I found the period not really all that stressful. I'd done fairly well during the year, so I knew that I just needed to maintain standards rather than do a big final push. So I think I put it at the time. I'm not blasé, but I'm certainly relaxed, and I think that was really important for me. Is that I wasn't that stressed because I knew I just needed to keep doing what I had been doing.
I'm quite a diligent student, so I'll focus a lot during school, so it doesn't take that much hard work outside of school, but our teachers were very good and I did study quite hard for my finals.
The learners are now awaiting final responses from universities.
So I've applied to UCT for business studies and then BA in hopes of BA LLB. I haven't decided which I'm going to choose yet. I'm leaning towards the business science or even maybe dropping down to BCom law. And I'm really hoping to go to UCT. I applied to Stellenbosch, but UCT is where I'd love to go.
Did dance studies, economics and history, and then English, maths, core, Afrikaans, life orientation, and I got 7 distinctions for all of the subjects, so I'm super happy, yeah.
The school says its secret is always seeking innovative ways to improve.
We've had a 100% pass rate year on year ever since the school opened. We are always, as a team of teachers and heads and deputies, we're always looking for ways of improving and adjusting what we do to help our students. I think it's a really exciting time to be in education. I think there's a lot of change going on. I think there's a lot of happening in the world that means that we have to adapt what we do and how we do it. So I think that explains a lot of our success over the years.
The school says it continues to nurture principled learners that will become captains of the industry. Thule Joga, SABC News, Cape Town.
And Oberholzer is the CEO of the Independent Examination Board. She joins me on the line. And good evening. Thanks very much for your time. You guys have done it again with a slight improvement on last year's results even.
Good evening, Vuyo. Yes, thank you very much indeed. It has been a really good set of results from these learners, and I really salute them for their achievement. They've worked hard, and obviously it's paid off.
What would you attribute it to?
You know, Vuyo, it's quite an interesting question, that, because these learners were the ones that started grade 10 in 2020 when we had the lockdowns. So ultimately, their senior schooling has been disrupted by COVID in both grade 10 and grade 11. And I attribute a lot of their success to their maturity and in realizing that they are in very difficult circumstances. And if they're going to get through this, they're going to have to knuckle under and accept the situation they're in and do the very best they can under those circumstances. So I would say a lot of it has got to do with the fact that these learners have taken the responsibility of the circumstances within which they are. But the children on their own is not going to do it. I think we owe a great debt to the teaching community that has supported these children through the last 3 years. In the lockdown periods, you had teachers who've been teaching, as we all know teaching to be, who suddenly overnight had to change the whole way of doing things. And instead of talking to children live in their classrooms, they were now talking to children through a computer screen, and probably weren't even sure if there were children behind that screen somewhere. And that was a major adaptation that the teaching community went to. So if you ask me, I would say it's a strength of character, and it's a dedicated teaching community who have stuck to their task despite the difficulties that they have had to face.
And would the method of teaching and learning have been the only challenge?
Sorry, can you say that again?
Would the method of teaching and learning have been the only challenge or facing the class of 2022?
Well, I certainly think it's a big part of it, the getting used to a new way of doing. This year in particular, I think the schools and the teachers have been faced with the added problem of load shedding. We all know how load shedding upsets the best laid plans of mice and men. We set plans and then suddenly realize we can't do what we had planned to do because there's load shedding. And that has affected, I think, quite substantially, not only the operations of schools. Imagine trying to do computer applications technology and you've got no electricity to run the computers. So there's that. And then in the study period, I mean, the learners plan, I'm going to study for 2 hours, then I'm going to eat supper, then I'm going to study for 2 hours, and they plan their day. Then suddenly there's load shedding and they can't have supper because it can't be cooked because there's no electricity. And they've got to readjust. Now, that is a distraction for somebody who's trying to apply themselves. So I think load shedding, definitely will play a role in this year's results. And there will certainly be areas where this is felt more harshly than other areas. Mm-hmm. I also think we've got the social issues of rural versus urban. The urban situation or the urban schools have easier access to a lot more resources than, for instance, the rural schools, where it takes a long time to get to a village, let alone a city. And so you will see within results differences according to where the school is situated. So yeah, I mean, a performance at school is a lot bigger than just the classroom.
Just on the last point, I mean, that has always been the case, isn't it? And how have you managed to overcome that over the years?
It's a very difficult one, Vuyo, because I think, parents will spend money on something that they believe is important. So if a parent is going to make a sacrifice in order to make sure that their children are at a good school, where they know they're going to be getting, or where they are getting good teaching, they may well be prepared to make that sacrifice. There are other parents who may have to or may simply determine to spend their money somewhere else. And in that case, then the learner may well not receive the education that they might at another school. Mm-hmm. Having said that, within the IEB, there are schools where the fees are high, much like within the state. There are state schools who have got school fees that are higher than IEB schools. Mm. And, they perform and they have the resources and they have the access that top IEB schools have. By the same token, we have schools that are, for example, in rural KwaZulu-Natal, in Limpopo, in the far north, in Zanin, and so on. And those schools are cost less in their fees because they can't afford to. The people in the area can't afford higher fees, but they do what they can. As best they can with what they have. And I think that's testimony to the initiative of the school managers and the teachers in those communities.
And the reason I had to ask that is because we often forget, and especially when the IEB comes with the kinds of numbers that we saw today, and I'm referring here to the pass rate. We often forget that within this community are, of course, poor schools and poor children as well, but who against odds, achieve the kind of results that we saw today. And that point can be underscored, especially because a conversation I'm having after the one we're having, you and I now, is about those issues. But you've been at it since what, 2007?
I've personally been working at the IEB since 2005, yeah. But the IEB has been around for sure.
Yes.
1993, I think, was our first matric examination.
And the reason I'm going there is because just your insights into what has gone into, keeping the IEB or getting the IEB to continue producing the kinds of results that we've seen, what have gone into it, and over the years, what I'm sure you've had to keep up with a lot of challenges like the three main ones that we've just spoken about. What have you put into your system to guarantee you, even better results as time progressed?
Well, that's such an interesting question, because success in education, wherever it happens, whether it's at the IEB, whether it's in the state system, depends on three things. It depends on a learner who wants to learn. So we are fortunate within the IEB, whether it's because the learner themselves want to learn, or whether they're being driven by parents who understand and believe in the importance of education. That's an unknown cause, But you've got parents who support their children, that do the very best, encourage them, motivate them, children who respond positively to that. And then a teaching community is prepared to say, okay, you coming to the party to learn, I will do the very best I can to make that happen for you so that you end up doing the best you can. Now, we've seen schools that are poor schools. We've seen schools within the state where as soon as you've got those three components together, the school succeeds. Obviously, the school management has a serious and an important part to play because they set the culture and they develop that culture that the children and the parents and the teachers buy into. So if you talk about the IEB success is only dependent on the schools that have those three components that drive the school to its success.
To what extent do you have such problems as, for example, you know, the absence, you know, of parents, but also, of course, the work ethic of the educators, because those are often cited as the key problems that, in particular, I mean, in the public school system in particular, sort of education there, you know, kind of rises or falls, you know, on those.
Certainly, it rises and falls on the educator to a large extent. I think within the independent school sector, because the parents are paying, and in some cases, quite substantial amounts of money, the pressure of the parents to make sure that the teachers do their job properly is a key factor. As the employer, the DBE would be doing the same to our educators in the public schools. And perhaps there are other factors within the public system that militate against the DBE's power to ensure that teachers are always working at the capacity that they not only can, but should be working. So I think that's, you know, the very fact that there's a substantial commitment on the part of the parents that drives them, number one, to be vigilant over what's happening in the school and what the teachers are doing. And number two, it's a motivating factor for the schools to make sure that the teachers do what they do, that they do what they should be doing and they do it properly. Simply because if they don't, the parents will say, well, I'm not sending my child to the school anymore. And the school won't have the money and the teacher won't have a job. So, yeah, I mean, as harsh as that may sound, it's a question of economics.
Quick last one before I let you go. I spoke last week to the Minister of Basic Education about why the results were announced this late this time around. She gave her reasons. What I want to ask is, do you have to wait for them to be ready before you can announce yours? Is that how it works?
No, we have to. We can only release our results once they've been approved by Umalusi, who is the quality assurance body that says yes, these results are authentic, correct, reliable, free of systemic irregularities. And Umalusi only had its approvals press release on Monday, I think it was. So once Umalusi has approved, whoever is written under the auspices of Umalusi may release their results. So Umalusi approved on Monday, we're releasing today, and the department is releasing tomorrow. When we talk about being so late, the issue is around what happened because of COVID. If we remember back in 2020, the examinations started some 2 to 3 weeks later than what they would normally have started, which pushed every system back after that. So the marking was delayed. The Umalusi processes for standardization and verification were pushed back. And so the results were only released in January. And that knock-on effect still persists.
And Olozo, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
Of course, she's the CEO of the Independent Examinations Board, where, of course, today they posted 98.42%. That's their pass rate for the class of 2022, slightly higher than last year's rate of 98.39%. Nearly 9% of their learners achieving entry to a degree study. Up next, we shift the focus to public schools matric results set to be announced tomorrow. An air of anticipation, not to mention the accompanying tensions and nervousness, as the Department of Basic Education prepares to announce matric results for the class of 2022. Now, for those still wondering, and many of you continue to ask, why matric results are being announced so late, a question I posed to the CEO of the IEB as well. Well, here's what the Minister of Basic Education, NG Motshekga, had to say when she appeared on this program last week, and we asked the question.
The opening of schools is unrelated to the release of matric results because those kids are not going back to school, the majority thereof. But even those who want to repeat can come to school. So it's unrelated. What we've decided to do as a sector, which is what we have been doing in the past, which was a problem, to put ourselves under pressure to want and produce results in December. Then there are some omissions, there are some challenges. Even here in January, there were some issues that we had to resolve, your maths paper. So there were some technicalities that we felt that unless we have cleared them, let's not release the results as if we're chasing something. Because the opening of schools has nothing to do with matric results.
Those are the reasons matric results for public schools are being announced tomorrow. Now, if history is anything to go by, certainly in percentage terms, today's Independent Examinations Board results will be far better than those of public schools to be announced tomorrow. And that's due to a variety of reasons, some of which we will be examining in a short while. Now, while this is not a debate about private versus public schools, the question we want to ask our panel of experts is whether the reasons for the gap in the performance of the two completely shuts the door to vast improvement. My guests are Professor Michael Lekoda, Vice Dean, Faculty of Education, Stellenbosch University. Dr. Ndumi Songidi is a lecturer with the University of KwaZulu-Natal's School of Education. Good evening to both of you, and thank you very much for your time.
Well, thank you, and good evening to all the listeners, and thank you for having me on your show.
Thanks to you for coming through.
Good evening, Vuyo, and good evening to your viewers. Thank you again as well for having me on the show.
Thank you. Now, I was just looking at the results of the past few years, with regard to both public schools and, of course, independent private schools. And this was quite interesting. When you look at the numbers, for example, if we take IEB schools, just over the past 5 years, there's a consistency, there, and I'm hoping we can bring the numbers up for our viewers to see. But those numbers stay high. There's a consistency, but when you compare, for example, with public education numbers, they are much lower. Comparatively speaking, and it's something that academics have dabbled in, and there's a whole host of reasons we keep on being told as to why why this is so. If I may start with you, Prof, just reminding our viewers of the reasons why we have such disparities. And I'm asking this very much aware that we're not even if you look at numbers terms and what goes into public education compared to private, I mean, we're not necessarily comparing apple with apple, but let's talk about it nevertheless.
Yeah, look, we are aware of the fact that, your IEB schools, your independent education board schools, whose results were announced today, has been higher, substantially higher than those of our public schools. And the reasons for that, for me, are various reasons. The main one is that you have, on the one side, your schools who are well-resourced and well-equipped schools with all your libraries and laboratories and enough teachers, and the ratio of a teacher per learner is not more than hopefully 30, 35. And then on the other hand, you have your public schools, of which many still suffers, the results of those days where these schools were deprived of those resources that your other schools are enjoying. And sadly, 30 years down the line of democracy, our country, our government, has not been able to narrow that gap between private and public schools, which is rather sad. I'm of the opinion that we must do more. It's clear that poverty still plays a major part in the outcome of the schools, and whilst we have poverty, those differences will remain, and to add insult to the injury, we are we are living in a time where people are getting poorer. People don't work because of the pandemic. People have lost their jobs, so that gap is widened, and it will call for a very, very major intervention for us to make that difference. There are other reasons, of course, which I would like to elaborate on, but in the main, those are the main reason between the two entities. But like I said, there are many other reasons that I would also like to discuss.
Dr. Ngidi?
Yes, for you.
For you?
Prof. Lekoda has very well articulated what is happening. I think for me, at the core of this differences between IEB and the public education sector lies inequality. Inequality, unfortunately, that we inherited from our very dark past, but also inequality that continues and is perpetuated today through current systems' failure to address things such as poverty, unemployment, things that really have a full-on effect on how education is delivered in the school. And so when you say that we are really not comparing apples with apples, we should be comparing apples with apples, because we shouldn't even have been having this discussion 30 years later. We should have by now have addressed these issues around infrastructure in the public schools, issues around services that are rendered in the public schools, things around psychosocial programs and psychosocial support for both learners and teachers in these schools. I think, as the Prof said, that's just a multitude of issues that unfortunately culminate to what now seems like the failure of the public sector, when really at the core we should also be talking about inequality that continues to be wider and wider instead of being reduced.
Now, Prof, I mean, we spend more on education as a percentage of the GDP than we do with any other vote for that matter. Now, it could well be that there isn't, we're not spending as much as we perhaps should. But there seems to be consensus around one fact, that we're not getting bang for the buck we are spending, no matter how little it may be.
Yes, first of all, I think our country is spending a hell of a lot of money on education. Poorer countries in Africa are spending much, much less, and they're getting much more out of the education system. I don't think our country can spend more on education given our financial circumstances at the moment. Education is indeed privileged to get so much money from the state coffers. What is important is how do you spend that money? How do you use that money? And here it is very obviously that leadership is very important. You can put 100 rand into the hands of a man and he can make wonders of it. And you can put another 100 rand in somebody else's hand and you will just waste it and you won't see a cent of it. So it's all about how do you go about using that resources that you that you receive, and how do you play the cards that you receive? And I'm not convinced that the leadership in education today in this country are making the best of the cards that they are receiving. We hear still about certain provincial education governments who don't even use the full budget that they're supposed to be using to build new classrooms and new schools. It seems as if there's a lack of planning and a lack of effort. The money is there, but we don't put the money to good use. And so we will also have a sincere look at the leadership of education in this country. If I can go back to the IEB schools. Now, yes, it is true that these schools are well resourced, but if you don't manage that resources in a very responsible way, it will also fall away as you're moving forward. What is clear with our results is that what we as adults and leadership and teachers and education departments, what we are doing is going to play a pivotal role in the outcome of the exams and the results of our learners. So by that I mean is that the way we govern and the way we lead and the way we're conducting our schools and our education system will eventually play out in the results of our schools. Just today, we saw that there are still learners who have not been placed. Now, look, this is of course a debate for another day, but we can ill afford that these learners who are struggling already, that as from day one, they are already put on the back foot. So they will continuously be in a battle to catch up. And there comes a time when our children will begin to, they will become tired because they must play catch up all the time. And it is the responsibility of our leadership and our politicians to make sure that the environment of education in our schools are conducive to learning and teaching. And I'm not clear in my mind that we can say that with other doubts. Gone are the days that we can blame apartheid for everything. Yes, it still plays a role, and yes, we are still lacking behind, but I am of the opinion that we have had 30 years to catch up, and I don't think we're doing well enough at this stage.
Dr. Ngidi, as Prof says, it is not about throwing money at the problem as such. It is about how we lead and how we govern, which then speaks to, the role of those within our education system who are being entrusted with this portfolio and the running thereof, but also, the teachers at our schools.
Yes, I agree totally with Prof. We have an endemic corruption problem in the country, and it's very easy to see then even speculate where the budget goes. I mean, if you say that there's a lot of money being spent in education, but we don't see that materializing or manifesting in tangible results. Just for example, today I saw an interview with the minister blaming apartheid infrastructure for blaming the apartheid system rather for the flailing in infrastructure in public schools. And I just sat and I was like, but we've had 30 years to fix such things as broken toilets and pit latrines in our public school systems, but yet there seems to be no buy-in, no form of leadership, as Prof rightfully says. And imagine what that does into the psyche of a child and a teacher who goes into that school, who works in that school, and a learner who attends in that school, vice versa, and in comparison to somebody in the IEB system where all the resources, all the infrastructure and everything else spells support. Everything else says that you are supported. This is a conducive environment, not just for learning, for teaching and learning, but also for extracurricular activities and other programs that can be facilitated through minor things and as just fixing infrastructure. And so at the core again of what is happening between IEB and public school lies the endemic corruption that we are facing, unfortunately, that is clouding any form of progress in our country. And once we tackle such things, and once there is buy-in and strong intentional leadership and a vision to drive this country forward, maybe we can start then finding solutions that are sustainable, and maybe we can the public system can start to catch up with the so-called private schooling system.
Of course, I mean, Prof, a great majority depend on of these matriculants on public schools, and in sheer numbers terms, it's a number, it's a lot of young South Africans. I mean, compared to, for example, people who can go to private schools. And one wonders, because one of the big issues is like overcrowding in many, I mean, in our public schools. And if you look at the teacher-pupil ratio, it leaves a lot to be desired. Those problems are very real as well.
Yeah, you see, I've been at pains, making the point that our schools are overcrowded. I've been at pains trying to making the point that you can't have effective teaching if you have more than 40, 50, 60 learners in the class. I've been to schools recently, and I'm still seeing more than 60 learners in a particular class. And I'm asking myself, we've gone through COVID for the last 3 years. This was the opportune time to build extra classrooms, because we had to give more space so that we can have social distance during the pandemic. And yet, very few, if any, new schools were built in this particular time. Here we are today on the first school day of 2023. And there are still learners not in class, not in school, still waiting on a place to be placed. And I'm afraid
what do you attribute that to, Prof? Is it lack of will, lack of leadership, and forward planning? Is it?
Yeah. I don't think we have enough visionary planning. I mean, we all know that public schools are overcrowded. And so we have to plan for that. We have to put in place more schools, more classrooms. You can't have a conducive environment for education if there are 2,000 learners at a particular school. It has a negative impact on everything, on the leadership, on teaching, on activities like sport, discipline. It makes things just so difficult. Yeah. And we still see that our schools are overcrowded. We still see that not enough schools has been built. And then to come and say, like my colleague has just say now, to come and say today that because of apartheid, we don't have enough classes, we don't have enough schools. But for 30 years, you have received the largest part of the budget for 30 years. Now, surely you could have made a difference for the last 30 years. You know, the learners who are in school today were all born free, born out of apartheid. And why must they still suffer of those legislation 30 years ago? So I think it's time for the education department to show some leadership, to show some visionary planning, and if needs be, you know, go and find the people out there, make use of business people, make use of good leaders, of good community leaders. Involve your community leaders in your community and ask them to come on board and help plan for our future, because clearly something is lacking, and clearly we are not doing things the right way, because as we speak here today, there are people standing in a queue waiting for their child to be placed.
Now, you know, I'm hoping, Dr. Ngidi, that this time around we're going to be able to bring up those numbers of just a little comparison between what we've seen coming out of IEB Matric results over the past few years and what we've seen coming out of, I mean, look at those IEB Matric results of the past 5 years, you know. 98%, 98.9%, 98%, 98.39, 2021. Those numbers stay there, you know, and they are quite high by anyone's standard. And when you compare or contrast them with the public schooling, public schools results, for example, those ones tell us a different story altogether. I mean, we're hovering like in the mid 70s to just over 80% over the past 5 years, but 75, 76%. It's where these numbers tend to hover. Of course, in pure numbers terms, we're talking a completely different ball game. But what I'm coming at is that tomorrow, you know, when people analyze whatever results Basic Education Minister Ng Motshekga will be announcing tomorrow, they are going to look at the numbers that will be announced tomorrow against the numbers that were announced today, and they are going to see the disparities. And some people are going to go back to the issues we have just discussed. But we cannot, you know, complete this conversation without talking, though, also about the role that parents play, the role that communities and their leaders also play. We've had, you know, I mean, reports of, or from the analysis of what has been going wrong. People have been talking, or experts have been talking about absent parents, parents who are not participating, you know, in the education of their children, those who may well be present in the lives of their children, but who don't participate in their education. Of course, in other instances, there are no parents to speak of. We know we have issues of communities that have raised service delivery and other issues, but in the process, compromising the education of their children by preventing children from going to school, by burning schools, libraries, and the like. And that is an issue we can't postpone any further. We have to discuss it.
Yeah, and just sideline here, Vuyo, as you were showing those statistics, particularly for the public schooling sector, there continues to be contestation around the actual pass rate, because there are public voices and so on about the actual figures, and and the fact that 33% is considered a pass in our education system.
Well,
and
that's exactly where I was going to go to next, because it speaks to the future of these children. Yes. Now that, I mean, the results were announced today and more will be announced tomorrow, do they have a future? Yeah. But anyway, yeah, continue, Doctor.
Yes. So do we take that into I mean, when we look at these statistics, we need to take them with a pinch of salt, because is it 78% of learners who received a 50% mark and above, or is it below? Where in other countries that would count as a fail, and what does that do to our numbers? But that's a story for another day. Back to some of the issues that you touch on here at the micro level, at the school and community level. Yes, there are just so many overwhelming issues that portray and really paint a picture of hopelessness and trauma that the anyone who has access to the public education system falls under. I mean, there's a lot of violence reported in our schools. There is a lot of absenteeism, particularly teacher absenteeism. And Prof was speaking up around the issue of overcrowding in schools, and maybe we shouldn't just look at it from a departmental level or at the national level, but also at the school level. I've had conversations with teachers who have told me that through research that there's an incentive that principals get the more learners they enroll in a school. And so you find in one school that there's over 1,500 learners, 80 learners per classroom, and the teachers are overwhelmed. And so that psychologically, that does something to the practice of teaching and learning, which then also feeds into our learners' achievements at the end of the year. And so when we look at this, it's all well and good to do this comparison, but we also need to start dissecting the anatomy of the public education system in our country. And it's just a flood of a lot of issues that are unfortunately tend to lean on the negative more than the positive. And for now, we really don't have a good story to tell.
Prof, from where you sit, I mean, when we compare these groups of matriculants, does it mean necessarily that those who come from the public schooling system, you know, will battle compared to those who come from your independent examination board system? Is there empirical evidence to back that up? Please unmute.
Thank you for your question. Very good question. Let me first also say, I want to touch on what has been said by Dr. Ndiri, and that is that one must not forget the role that teachers are playing in our school. And not all public schools are as bad. There are many public schools out there who are doing a wonderful job, mainly because the teachers and the governing body and the principal, the school community in that particular school are doing excellent work. They're walking the extra mile. They're making the best of their particular circumstances. So it is not all doom and gloom. There are wonderful kids coming from those schools, coming onto the university, and they excel. And that just shows to me, because what I see here at the university, I see that when you look at the potential, there is no difference between a kid coming from an IEB school or coming from a private school. They have the same potential, and after a year or two, you will see that they even excel, and they are even doing very, very good at university level. So what it tells us is that there is no lack of potential. All they need and want is a chance to show that they can study, they want to study, and they want to further their careers. They only want a chance. And it is the responsibility of the adults, the teachers and the parents, to make sure that they are afforded these opportunities. And you spoke about the role of the parents. We cannot deny, if you look at your IEB schools, The parents there play a very important role. They are actively involved and they are making sure that their kids get the best education they possibly can.
Okay.
They are actually acting as a watchdog, if I may use this word of your program. They are acting as a watchdog at what's happening in our schools. And I'm afraid many of our parents in our public school don't play that same role. And parents and governing bodies must accept the responsibility that they must actually be the watchdog of what's happening with their kids in their schools.
Okay.
And they don't play that role. Because I'm of the opinion if they do play that particular role, things will improve, it will go better. They must help their teachers and their school governing bodies accountable. And they can only do it if they go there and if they get involved in their child's education. This is a very important factor.
Professor Michael Lekwada from Stellenbosch University, Dr. Dumisongidi from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you so much to both of you for coming on the program this evening, even though we may not have exhausted really the issues we would have wanted to talk about. Now, Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga says the rollout of online registration in all provinces will help speed up the placement of learners. She says all provinces should embrace the process. She was in Durban monitoring the first day of the academic year in coastal schools. And that's what we're going to leave you with. Do join us again tomorrow night, same time, for another focus on our schooling system on the back of tomorrow's results of public school matriculants. Have a good night.
KwaZulu-Natal has about 2.8 million learners in the public education system. There are over 6,000 schools in the province. The registration process is often a tedious one and in some instances results in delays at the start of the academic year for some learners. Basic Education Minister Angie Motshekga says all provinces need to embrace the system of online applications as it will enable them to work efficiently.
Online will be the best way to go around. So if parents in Gauteng, in the squatter camps can do it, parents in rural areas will be able to do it. If they can do it in Northern Cape, in the deep rural, I'm sure we can do it anyway.
Minister Motshekga monitored the first day of the opening of schools in the coastal provinces. She says the lack of proper infrastructure in some schools remains a challenge.
It's illegal to have asbestos by law, but we're not able to replace them. All we can do is to paint and treat them in the meantime so they're not harmful to learners, and hoping that with time we'll be able to do that. You can see that it's an old school, there's no space, you can't even put sports in field, you can see where we are, there's no playing area. So we have a major problem with infrastructure.
The Education Minister says current rolling blackouts in the country are not affecting teaching and learning time in most schools as classes take place during the day. Simpiwe Makanya, SABC News, Durban.